Right now, you're watching 10 Tampa Bay Plus, and we are following breaking news for you.
Yeah, Jeffrey Knight faces 8 felony charges with more likely to come. Let's listen in on this update.
Be charged with violating navigation rules to include failure to maintain a proper lookout and failure to maintain a safe speed. The ferry boat captain, Denise Kimmerer, has been charged with violating a navigation rule for failing to have a working stern light at the time of the accident. Once we obtained enough evidence to charge Mr. Knight with leaving the scene of an accident, we learned he was in the Bahamas. We worked with Mr. Knight's attorney to have him fly back to the United States, where we took him into custody at the Clearwater Airport without incident. He was then booked into Pinellas County Jail, where his bond was set at $40,000. Our hearts go out to all those affected by this tragic accident, especially the family of Jose Castro. Our hope is that the conclusion of this investigation can be the first step in bringing closure and justice to his family and all those affected by this event. We appreciate the collaborative effort with the Clearwater Police Department, United States Coast Guard, Pinellas County State Attorney's Office, and the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office on this investigation. Our investigative team did a complete and thorough job and allowed the facts and evidence to lead this investigation. At this point, to go into more specific details about the investigation, I'm going to turn it over to Captain Matt Della Rosa.
Hey, good afternoon. It's Captain Matt Della Rosa, D-A-L-L-A-R-O-S-A. Just wanted to cover some of our investigative efforts. I know I spoke with everybody in this room about 3 months ago or so when this event first occurred. There was a lot of questions that were swirling around about what was happening and what may come of that. And today's kind of that day where we get to talk about what was done, the exhaustive efforts that were put out. So I want to make sure that we address that. Our team did a unbelievably great job trying to pull a mountain of evidence together for this case. You can imagine there was numerous witness interviews that had to be completed. We cataloged about 48 witness interviews in total, which encompassed a lot of the people that were on board both of those vessels, as well as another 50 or so interview follow-ups for associated businesses, for attempts to pull video footage, all those kind of things with associated public safety agencies to pull all of this together. So our investigative team had hours and hours and hours of time put in with volumes of data to pull all this together. We conducted a reconstruction on both vessels completely, mapping it with some sophisticated technology and then reconstructing some of those crash sites digitally. We also conducted a reconstruction in reality where we were able to test drive the vessel that was in question so that we could understand the dynamics of it completely, do a complete functionality check. All of that was required so that we could conduct a thorough investigation and to be confident with the charges that we ultimately presented to the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office, which has ultimately brought us to where we are today. So I just want to commend that investigative team, which was made up of a bunch of different people from FWC, a lot of other agencies. All of it led to a very successful investigation that was fact-based, that was led by the evidence that we had, facts that we could stand on and prove so that we had a clear, competent case that could be filed with everything that was at hand. So with that, I will open to some of those questions, but I do want to talk about what the case itself presented.
Can I ask you specifically about that aft light? Because Mr. Knight had earlier claimed that the aft light was not functional. So let me ask you a couple of different questions about that. Number one, how are you able to determine that the aft light was not functional given the damage to the boat and the way that that happened? Number two, does that absolve Mr. Knight of any responsibility on the waterway for what occurred that night?
So I'll answer that sort of simply. I don't want to litigate the entire case here. The Pinellas County State Attorney's Office can be referred to for some of that stuff in terms of how the case will be litigated. Factually speaking, Mr. Kimmerer was charged as the captain of that vessel for not having that light present at the time of the event. That fact has been documented, and that's what those charges were for.
Will Mr. Knight be required to wear an ankle monitor while he's out on bond?
Yeah, that'll be up to the findings from the judge that once they decide what his terms of his release will be.
We had some people reach out to us saying that the investigation appears to have taken a long time. Can you speak to that? I know you said you were gathering evidence and trying to make sure you had the facts, but can you speak to that part of it?
Sure. Relatively speaking, this was a fairly expeditious event for us. Boating accident investigation, I talked about it in this room about 3 months ago, takes a long time. Car accident reconstruction is difficult. Boating accidents present a larger challenge. Everything sinks to the bottom. Evidence isn't readily available. You can't analyze skid marks the same way on a roadway. A lot of times we'll see a roadway closed for 7-8 hours where it's evaluated heavily for a vehicle accident. We don't have that luxury when it comes to boats. So we have to kind of build this stuff back in a different way. We got to build a complete chronology, not just of the seconds that actually led up to the accident, but even the hours and days that preceded that. We have to do significant functionality testing. We did a complete GPS forensic analysis on the GPSs that were available for all the vessels that were there. We did a lot of electrical testing, like the light that was in question, to ensure that we could understand what was and was not functioning at the time of the event. Same would be true for any kind of radar equipment. All of that has to be put together so that we can present a complete chronology of the event itself and be confident with what did occur and then apply our charges as appropriate.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about his vessel in particular? Did you find any evidence the night of the accident that his boat was A, taking on water, and B, that it had a functional radar system on that would have indicated where the ferry was to Mr. Knight if he were looking at it?
All right, so piecing that apart, the functionality test for us revealed that the radar system was not functioning. But we did not find any water intrusion or any significant issues that would have limited the vessel's capability to remain in place that night.
Now, Mr. Knight said that he stayed on scene for a period of time. Can you speak to that period of time in which he left and how these charges resulted from that?
Absolutely. So the charges themselves are for the leaving the scene. And I know that question's been raised. What were these charges actually for? The charges were for leaving the scene of the accident, which resulted in death and the injury to the individuals that were there. Mr. Knight did remain on scene, and again, I'm not going to litigate the entire case. He did remain on scene for a period of time, but our evidence revealed, and a lot of 911 call evidence revealed, that there was a significant change in the demeanor of what was occurring, and there was an attempt to leave the scene, which was then tracked down. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office ultimately stopped Mr. Knight a good distance from the scene, and the discussion he had with those deputies did not indicate any desire to remain at the scene, and that's what led us to the charges we have today.
When you say change in demeanor, is that what you're talking about, or describe Mr. Knight's change in demeanor over this?
Again, I don't want to litigate it all the way through, but there was a period of time where his vessel and the crew stayed on scene. There were some 911 calls made, but then that 911 call, as it progresses, you can hear a voice that says, I don't want you to say anything. There's a lot of things that are being caught on that 911 call. So with that, we felt there was a significant change in an attempt to not stay. When you add that to what the Pinellas County State Sheriff's Office encountered, there was no attempt to actually complete the exchange of information, rendering all the aid that's possible, as well as if you're looking for the ability of emergency services, all of that would have been at the scene. There was no need to actually leave the scene itself.
Do you think we'd be here today having a press conference if you just taken responsibility from the start?
I don't want to get into the what ifs. We had the facts that we are, and we filed our charges based on those facts.
Now, that search warrant, I remember it saying that he was telling passengers on his boat to not call 911 or people to not call 911. Do you see any possibility of future charges stemming from that or anything to do with that topic?
I feel confident with the charges that we filed. They're fully fact-based. They're based on the chronology we built, and we'll stand behind the case that we filed.
Was Mr. Knight complicit with law enforcement throughout this 3-month period? It's kind of a long period.
Yeah, so during that 3-month period, I know that question's come up of what was going on, why hasn't something been done. We've been working our investigative case. For the majority of that, Mr. Knight hasn't been aware of our actions. Ultimately, we've been working a closed case like we would any other case. Mr. Knight was in the Bahamas, but that was irrelevant to the fact that we were working our investigation. We made notification to his attorney, and he was cooperative with returning himself to the United States.
What happens to his boating license? Is that already suspended?
Any judgments based on the actual case can be rendered at the end.
Did you guys have eyes on him the whole time while he was in the Bahamas? Because there was rumors that he might flee even further away, but you guys just...
Yeah, we were working our case, and once it was time to file those charges, we were effectively able to get them filed with an arrest yesterday, so I feel confident with that.
Can you explain the digital reconstruction? Were you able to recreate the collision that happened and how that played into this?
So again, a lot of that's for courtroom testimony. I talked about it again when we were here 3 months ago. We map with a sophisticated laser system that makes data points all over the vessel, very similar to how car accidents are reconstructed, so that digitally those images can exist and we can kind of see how damage played out. I think I mentioned it the last time that fiberglass and these kind of metals move around different than cars do, so you want to be able to kind of lay that stuff out. What would have looked like before? How did it kind of indent? What kind of flexibility was existing so that you can really place where people were and what would have happened in the accident, so we can explain the dynamics of the crash and understand what occurred.
The stern light, is that a misdemeanor charge?
Yes, ma'am, that's a
So
misdemeanor.
outside of the 3 misdemeanors, 1 for the ferry and then 2 for Knight for a proper lookout and whatever.
Safe speed.
Outside of those 3, which have to do with the actual collision when it happened and who, I guess, was at fault, or could any more charges stem for why the collision happened?
Yeah. Currently, the charges we filed are what we're happy with in terms of the investigation being complete at this point. If the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office wants to make any additional information, they can, based on our entire chronology and investigative report that was submitted. But the charges we recommended are what we talked about today.
Can you explain to our viewers who, when we go back to the timing of an investigation, and, a lot of this through videos that we saw, through what we heard after the crash and whether he left or whether he didn't leave. The people wondering at home, why evidence matters and, when it all comes into play, how it's going to come into play for the court. Can you explain, why it matters that you guys have sufficient evidence before making these arrests and how that takes time?
Absolutely. So ultimately, we wanted to, if there was a violation, and we said this at the onset, if there was a violation determined, we were dedicated to making sure that we filed whatever was appropriate. There were victims involved. An individual lost his life. We've been in contact with those families and those victims and understood their concerns and their needs. And we wanted to make sure that a case that we brought forward would be legally binding, but also would be based on facts itself. It's easy to move with emotion, unfortunately. It's a tragic case that someone had died, but we wanted to bring forth a case that was based on facts, that was supported by evidence, that we could stand behind, and that's what we filed and what we've brought based on this arrest as of yesterday.
During this investigation, were you able to determine how fast Mr. Knight was going?
Yeah, so some of that will be kind of pieced out in the actual litigation piece of it, but all that would be in the GPS analysis that we don't need to necessarily cover line by line.
You said his radar was not working. Is he required on that vessel to have it?
No radars are ultimately required on recreational vessels, but it's a piece of lookout material, and it's part of what we would do in a functionality test. So
Was there sufficient evidence about how fast he was going in regards to reckless boating, or did you not have sufficient evidence to bring a charge before you?
no, so we brought that charge of safe speed because the navigation rule that governs safe speed says that you should be traveling at a safe speed to avoid or attend to a risk of collision. And based on the fact that a collision did occur, that navigation rule was violated.
This kind of is an example of why we should be less reckless on the waterways. That's a statement that the family gave to us earlier. They said they hope that this will prevent other people from doing anything like this. Can you also speak to that? Do you think that there will be changes on the waterways? Maybe people will think twice before speeding or drinking. I mean, I know that wasn't the case here, but just being safer on the waterways.
We appreciate the support of the family. They've been in contact with us. The statement they put out speaks for itself. They're dealing with a loss in their family, and hopefully these charges help bring them just a little bit of closure. So with that, I'll give Ben Lang a chance if he wants to make any statements from the State Attorney's Office, and then we'll probably close it from there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take any questions.
Was vessel homicide considered as a charge?
So we're confident in the charges that we've brought forward. We have a very good working relationship with Florida Fish and Wildlife, and that plays into the time that we've spent over the past 3 months looking into everything. We take time to compare facts and put them towards the law. We don't make emotional decisions at the office, so that's why we have the charges that we have here.
Are you guys looking at charges for any of the other people on Knight's boat? I know there are 5 others.
As of right now, this is what we brought forward.
Mr. Knight has a history related to incidents on the water. In looking at the totality of the case, was there any evidence to suggest to you that maybe he shouldn't have had a boating license and been out there to begin with?
I don't have any information on that. We're aware of the prior incidents, but again, this is a separate case, and this is what we're looking at and what we're working with.
So during this time, his license is not suspended. Does that mean when these go out, could he use his boat again, or could he operate another?
My understanding is a condition of his bond was that he was not to operate any vessels.
Will you ask him to surrender his passport?
I'm not going to comment on anything outside of that.
And now that he is on bond, what is next? Is he going to have an ankle monitor, or does he have to be on house arrest, or no?
That would be up to the judge. Right now, the next step would be his first appearance at arraignment.
Can you just speak to the arrest? What does it mean for you guys to know that this man has been arrested, is facing charges for this incident that left one person dead and several others injured?
Well, obviously, this was a very tragic case that occurred, and we've taken the time over the past 3 months to look at everything, not make any emotional choices or reactions, look at the evidence, look at the facts, compare everything to the laws that we have, and that's how we've gotten to where we are today. Obviously, we are happy with the position that we're in, and we're confident with the charges that we're bringing forward. Mr. Knight was ultimately cooperative and did come back from the Bahamas, and so now we're starting the next leg of the case.
In terms of the next part of the case, are you looking to litigate this to trial? Are you looking to feed this out? What's your next steps?
So ultimately, we'd be going forward. We're filing charges. We have 8 counts of leaving the scene, and that's what we'll be going forward on. And how that plays out, we'll have to see.
Thank you, guys. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Again, thank you for joining.
All right now listening to the culmination of 3 months of investigations that took place. At the center of this, Jeff Knight, the man whose boat, as we showed you video over the past 3 months, crashing into a ferry in Clearwater, injuring more than 40 people, killing one man, 41-year-old Jose Castro, father of 2.
And we knew this was going to be a long investigation because boating accident investigations take long. They take longer than the car investigations. And that is what FWC officials was talking about. They said that they did exhaustive interviews, more than 48 interviews in total. And we saw that in the search warrant. I just went over that a few hours ago and seeing what the passengers said, not just the passengers on the ferry, but the passengers on Knight's boat. They took all of that. And they feel like they had enough evidence then to present that to the state attorney's office. That's why we're seeing those charges brought now.
All right, us sitting up right here, a Cliff's Notes version of everything they've done over the past 3 months. And you mentioned the 48 interviews, another 50 interviews after that. How did we get here, right? We want to give you a bit of a timeline of all of that right here. So this started back in April, late April. The ferry was headed back from the Sugar Sand Festival. That was on Clearwater Beach. That surveillance video from Coachman Park shows Jeff Knight's boat crash into the ferry. That was around 8:40 p.m. You can see he stayed on the scene for about 10 minutes. His attorneys say he tried pulling the ferry closer to the shore to help. Then at 8:50, he leaves. Knight's attorneys say that is because his boat started taking on water. You heard a series of questions about that. Much of that investigators did not want to get into. But the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office stopped him, Mr. Knight, as FWC says he was returning home.
Knight is facing 8 counts of leaving the scene of a boating accident involving death or serious bodily injury. That is a 3rd-degree felony. He's also expected to be charged with 2 misdemeanors, failure to maintain a safe speed and failure to maintain a proper lockout. Both of those are enhanced charges because they resulted in a deadly boating accident. Knight is also facing multiple lawsuits from passengers on the ferry that night who say he was careless and negligent while operating his boat.
All right, so we mentioned the man that lost his life because of all this. You see his picture right there, 41-year-old Jose Castro. He died in that crash. He was a father of 2 girls, 8 years old and 3 years old. Earlier this afternoon, we heard from the mother of those 2 girls saying the 8-year-old now, Jen, old enough to read information for herself online. That is the heartbreaking part. Neither of those young ladies at the news conference earlier this afternoon. His sister called him Jose Castro, her best friend, and all of his friends and family told us he was always smiling, could brighten up a room. By all accounts, fantastic guy. We heard from his sisters just hours ago ahead of the new details that we learned today.
It's been a very, very terrible time for us. I want to keep the memory of my brother alive. I have my mother back in Peru, devastating and crying every day for him. I have 2 girls that we have to explain. The mom have to explain to them why dad is not coming back or dad is not here anymore. Well, thank you so much. My brother is being missing. This is a tragic time for us. It's not a day who we don't think about my brother, and we remember. It's been very hard days for us, very painful days, not just for me, my mom, the kids, the mom, for everybody, for the family, for the whole family who has been devastating for this, missing my brother.
10 Tampa Bay News reporter Asha Patel joins us. Asha, you've been there for the press conference. The family says this is also about remembering.
That's right. Well, we just heard some of the details regarding Knight's arrest. The family says, yes, this is a positive step forward, but they do not want Jose Castro's memory to be faded in all of this. They said that even though that Knight was arrested, that's not going to bring back the father of 2. Castro's sister, Sandy Todd, said that Sunday of the crash, Jose was on the ferry leaving a festival, trying to get home to go grocery shopping for his daughters. Unfortunately, he never made it home, being the only one to pass away in behind this tragedy. The mother of his 2 girls, Jenny, also spoke and said while the charges again are a positive step, her daughters now have to live every single day without their father. I also spoke to Castro's cousin Maria, and I want you to take a listen to what she had to say to me about how she has seen smiles fade throughout her family.
I saw my cousin and my aunt. I mean, I don't see the light, the happy light of my aunt used to have, of course. Everybody's still, you know, a little sad, but just living their lives and waiting for justice.
Now, Castro's family told me that they come here at the Clearwater Harbor every single day to try to talk to Jose and just to remember him. Back to you guys.
Fantastic work out there, Asha, on such an awful situation. And I know you reported earlier Jose Castro's mother in Peru right now, grieving.
That's right. The family did tell me that the mother is in Peru. You know, Jose came to the United States years ago, and he did stay with his cousin Maria as well as Sandy. And this is just a very difficult time for the family and the mom, just trying to communicate as much as she can. But like you just said, a lot of grieving going on here. Reporting live in Clearwater, Asha Patel, 10 Tampa Bay.
Asha, thank you.
Yeah, we also heard from the lawyers representing Jose Castro's family. They talked about the significance of the charges Knight is facing and likely will face. They also mentioned a need to improve safety on the water.
We're appreciative of everything the prosecutors have been doing, everything law enforcement's been doing. The fact that there are 8 felony charges is really important. I think all of Florida, all of we Floridians have a vested interest in cases like this. Unanimously, our legislature has pushed protection on the waters. We want safe waterways. We want enhanced penalties for these types of actions on the waterways to make sure that this doesn't happen and to make the waterways safe. So these charges are very important, but in these criminal cases, especially when there's a lot of media attention, sometimes the victims can get lost in that. And that's what we want to make sure doesn't happen, that Jose Castro and all the victims in this case are remembered and are highlighted. The cross is right over there. We want to get some pictures around the cross so people know where they can come leave flowers, where they can come see where his memory is set up here, where this all happened. So the charges are really important. They're just the first step in what's going to be a long process.
First step in a long process, a shaky step at that. And Ever, the reporter, constantly investigating. You're getting tips right now, bits of advice.
Yeah, from Jeffrey Knight's team. So I've been in contact with them all day. I've been in contact with them over the past couple of months. They are going to be releasing us a statement within the next hour, and we know over the past couple of months, they wanted a lot of things to be looked at. They wanted to know what the ferry's inspection reports are. They were asking, they sent 2 or 3 letters to FWC to make sure this, and this was looked at. And we know looking at ferry inspection records, nothing stood out. They're going to give us a statement in the next hour, see what happened from all that. That's something we'll continue to look into.
I know you will. And a lot of questions still remain unanswered, despite the fact that it took 3 months to get to this particular point. I want to tell you this as well, because Knight is also a local businessman. We've talked a lot about that. Owning multiple establishments right here in the Bay Area. That includes the popular St. Pete concert venue, Janice Live. Knight became a partial owner there back in 2009. Now, days after that ferry crash back in April, he stepped down from that spot. The venue says he is no longer affiliated with Janice.
In 2019, court records show Knight was involved in a boating accident and faced charges including careless operation of a vessel and violation of navigation that caused an accident. Those charges were dismissed. He was cited for careless operation of a vessel in 2017. Also in 2012, Knight was sued by the family of a man who died after falling into the water while getting off a boat they said belonged to Knight. The family says it did not have proper safety railing along the gangway. The case was dismissed.
All right, now, Jen, so a lot of talk about the search warrant, right? So we pulled up that graphic for viewers to see what we're talking about, but you actually got into the granular details of that search warrant.
Yeah, so I went through this when we saw it in June. I just went through it again. When it comes to this current case, the affidavit is now sealed. So I went into the Pinellas County Clerk of Courts. That's sealed. I am told that a judge has to unseal that. We're hoping to see that affidavit be unsealed sometime tomorrow. But as far as the search warrant tells us a lot of stuff of what went through this investigative part. So the night of the crash, Coast Guard members interviewed the passengers of Knight's boat that were quoted saying they heard Mr. Knight saying, "My life is over," and that Knight was on the phone with his attorney prior to leaving the scene of the crash. Another passenger told officials that Knight did not make any movements to assist passengers on the ferry until all the people on his boat yelled at him to do so. It goes on to say, based on security footage, witness statements, and 911 recordings, there was probable cause showing Knight in violation of leaving the scene of an accident that caused injury without giving all possible aid to those involved. FWC also listed the results of checking out the items from this search warrant and found the boat. Because remember this, Frank, that was the big argument, that's the reason why Knight left. That's what his lawyer was saying, that Knight left because it was taking on water.
Right.
That search warrant said that there was no evidence of that boat taking on water.
That's very telling right there. And also when you're dealing with the situation, so tragic, Jen, I know as an investigator, so many questions that remain unanswered. You don't know exactly which ones you can tap into initially. And authorities can't really tell you much when this starts to happen.
Yeah, because we knew this was going to take a long time. We knew that the boat investigations are going to be different than a vehicle accident. We saw that they reconstructed the scenes as best as they can, but it's not as easy of doing it on land as you are doing it on water, and then collecting GPSs, the 911 calls, the witness statements, and everything else that goes on during these investigations, so that they do have all of the fact-based evidence they kept reiterating to present to the state attorney to see whether or not what charges will be filed.
A lot going into this, and even though it took roughly 3 months to get to this point, officials saying they did this expeditiously. Now, the FWC says the U.S. Coast Guard was in charge of investigating any of the issues with the commercial ferry. And the days after that crash, Knight's attorneys pushed officials to look further into that specifically in terms of the lighting on the ferry. It investigates, as you know, Jen, obtain those records that you were talking about. It shows the Clearwater Ferry had passed the last inspection. That was in 2022 and had enough life-saving equipment for everyone on board. That inspection was good through 2027. Now, the ferry service, as we've told you over time, it was shut down for about 10 days after that crash.
And that was one of the reports that Knight's lawyer wanted FWC to look at. 10 Tampa Bay News reporter Chris Hurst spoke with the first responders who rushed to the scene that night and got a look into what they faced to save lives.
Sunday night, we were actually just at the table watching some baseball when the call initially came out.
Nate Vasquez and his shift partner, Rob Ramos, arrived within minutes of the call and knew there were multiple injuries from two boats colliding.
I will say I never thought of a boat wreck with 45 or 50 patients.
When we were going in to the incident is when it, was my first time thinking about something like that.
Their rescue lieutenant, Robbie Weiner, was in charge of the triage. He was the first from the station to arrive and could hear screaming from the shoreline.
I could hear the concern that people were having. I could see people visibly upset. I could see people injured, and I could see that they needed help.
We had to carry all of our bags through a large marsh area, kind of like wet sand, into some waist-deep water to actually get to the boat.
These two, this one first. They all used one word to describe the scene: chaos.
You can't mimic the level of chaos of showing up to 45 injured people that you would think in a classroom or with actors or anything. Being waist deep in water with a boat that's moving, with lights, sirens, helicopters flying over, a pirate ship nearby. It was very intense, and you can't prepare for that.
But they fell back on their training for a mass casualty incident.
Just the passion for helping people.
Finding those with the worst injuries and doing their job.
My goal in my life is to make a difference in somebody's life, and this job affords me that opportunity every single day.
Yeah, and that was our Chris Hurst reporting there. By the way, there's another mass casualty training happening tomorrow at Clearwater High School. This helps first responders know what to do in situations like this. So if you see a lot of emergency personnel around that area tomorrow morning, it's just a training.
Just a training. No need to be alarmed out there. And, we talk about all the investigations that took place. 48 investigations, another 50 to follow up after that. But the quote that stands out to me from Captain De La Rosa about Mr. Knight, he says, quote, "No desire to remain on the scene." And we just wrapped up that news conference just a moment ago, FWC. They talked about the investigation as well, specifically how we got to this point. Let's go ahead and listen in.
You can imagine there was numerous witness interviews that had to be completed. We cataloged about 48 witness interviews in total, which encompassed a lot of the people that were on board both of those vessels, as well as another 50 or so interview follow-ups for associated businesses, for attempts to pull video footage, all those kind of things with associated public safety agencies to pull all of this together. So our investigative team had hours and hours and hours of time put in with volumes of data to pull all this together. We conducted a reconstruction on both vessels completely, mapping it with some sophisticated technology and then reconstructing some of those crash sites digitally. We also conducted a reconstruction in reality where we were able to test drive the vessel that was in question so that we could understand the dynamics of it completely, do a complete functionality check. All of that was required so that we could conduct a thorough investigation and to be confident with the charges that we ultimately presented to the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office, which has ultimately brought us to where we are today.
Captain Della Rosa with Clearwater Police Department using that word again, thorough, because they want to make sure the charges that they levy stick.
Yeah, they kept on reiterating that they wanted to make sure they had all the evidence before they presented this to the state attorney. And when the state attorney spoke, the state attorney's office spoke, they said that we feel confident in the charges we have brought because of the evidence they have seen.
Now, the genesis of all this started back in April, late April, I believe the 27th. Many people at home may be wondering how we got to this point with this breaking news. So we have a timeline for you of how all of that happened back in April. The ferry was actually headed back from the Sugar Sand Festival. That was on Clearwater Beach. A lot of people check that out. Surveillance video from Coachman Park shows Jeff Knight's boat crashing into that ferry. That was around 8:40 p.m. He stayed on that scene for about 10 minutes or so. His attorneys say he tried pulling the ferry closer to shore to help out. Then, 8:50, he leaves that scene. Knight's attorneys say that is because his boat started to take on water. Again, his boat started to take on water, according to Mr. Knight. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office stopping him as FWC says he was returning home.
The functionality test for us revealed that the radar system was not functioning. But we did not find any water intrusion or any significant issues that would have limited the vessel's capability to remain in place that night. The charges themselves are for the leaving the scene. I know that question's been raised. What were these charges actually for? The charges were for leaving the scene of the accident, which resulted in death and the injury to the individuals that were there. Mr. Knight did remain on scene, and again, I'm not going to litigate the entire case. He did remain on scene for a period of time, but our evidence revealed, and a lot of 911 call evidence revealed that there was a significant change in the demeanor of what was occurring, and there was an attempt to leave the scene, which was then tracked down. The Pinellas County Pinellas County Sheriff's Office ultimately stopped Mr. Knight a good distance from the scene, and the discussion he had with those deputies did not indicate any desire to remain at the scene, and that's what led us to the charges we have today.
So Mr. Knight's statement and the investigation conflicting right. They're also getting word that Mr. Knight had to return from the Bahamas.
Yeah, and that's where they alerted his attorney that these charges were going to be filed, and then they said he was cooperative and he left the Bahamas and then came to St. Pete, where then he was taken into custody. And we know that all happened last night. He bonded out of jail around 10 o'clock last night. Yes, and that's where we heard all of the updates from the presser, the felony charges he is facing, and of course a few misdemeanor charges as well.
We keep moving the line on the timeline, and that goes for you too, Jen, because you're getting updates from your sources as we speak right now as well.
Yeah, we're just trying to talk to both teams. We're trying to talk to Knight's team. Knight's team says that they should have a statement from him over the next 30 minutes or so. We should be hearing from Knight's team. Of course, they've had a lot of questions during this whole investigation, sending lots of letters to FWC, making sure everything was looked at, not just on Knight's boat, but the ferry boat as well.
Absolutely. Getting back to that thorough investigation on every side involved there. I want to go ahead and bring in 10 Tampa Bay News reporter Angelicia Bruton. Okay, we're going to get to her momentarily. She's been sitting in on that same news conference that we listened to as well. So, of course, we expect to get some additional details from what officials may have said to her.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that everybody's asking is, why did it take so long? This crash happened in April. Why? We're at the end of July now, and it's because boating accidents are so much different than a car accident. And they talked about that when they have to do these reconstructions of the scene.
That's a perfect segue to this right here as they talk about reconstructing that scene. Let's go ahead and listen in.
We map with a sophisticated laser system that makes data points all over the vessel, very similar to how car accidents are reconstructed, so that digitally those images can exist and we can kind of see how damage played out. I think I mentioned it the last time that fiberglass and these kind of metals move around different than cars do, so you want to be able to kind of lay that stuff out. What would it have looked like before? How did it kind of indent? What kind of flexibility was existing so that you can really place where people were and what would have happened in the accident, so we can explain the dynamics of the crash and understand what occurred.
Understand what occurred, right? That's the question many people have right now. Just to recap the timeline of how we all got here. The deadly crash that happened almost exactly 3 months ago, April 27th, a little before 9 p.m. That is when FWC's investigation started with this whole catastrophe. They reviewed surveillance video, looked at the physical evidence too, and interviewed witnesses. 48 witnesses, additional 50 interviews after that. Officials say they used all that information to ultimately arrest Mr. Knight, Jeff Knight. Multiple charges is what he's facing right now. That ferry was heading back from the Sugar Sand Festival that is on Clearwater Beach there, but that's the surveillance video that many people have seen by now, Jan.
Yeah, and we know that that is the video that they also looked at. They looked at video from there, looked at GPSs, and a big thing also I think was interesting, Frank, is the 911 calls, the power of the 911 calls coming from Knight's boat, what the passengers were telling 911, and then what they could also hear coming from, from those calls. They took that all into consideration as part of this investigation, not just interviewing 48 people, but then they had, 50 follow-up interviews as well after that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of numbers that we're dealing with here, but the quote that really stood out to me, Jen, is Captain De La Rosa saying no desire to remain at the scene, especially after something so catastrophic like this boat collision that took place.
And that's why we are seeing those felony charges for leaving the scene of the accident and not staying until emergency personnel got there.
An official saying, quote, they are confident in their charges. They didn't want to roll something out quickly. People were asking you multiple times over, what is going on with this investigation? That was information that they could not release because it is an active investigation. But just getting to this point, it took some 3 months, but they wanted to make sure that the charges that they levied stuck. They were legit.
Yeah, and like, they were doing this investigation through, they were collecting all of this evidence, and they were staying tight-lipped because it was an investigation, and they were making sure that they had everything, all of their T's crossed and their I's dotted. And so through the investigation, we really just saw a few letters coming from Knight's attorneys that they released. We saw that search warrant in June that got released. I think that was pretty much really gave us the idea of the extent of the investigation that was going on, from the interviews and what they collected from the GPSs and what they saw when it came to the water on Jeff Knight's boat, because that was the big argument, that there was so much water being taken on. That's why he left the scene.
An intriguing point there. As a veteran investigator, Jen, how does one recreate the scene if he or she was not there? All they have is some surveillance video, no audio, but they do have the 911 calls. They're backtracking.
Yeah, and I think that's why you heard them say that's why it takes so long. The reconstruction of a scene in the water is so much different than that on land.
Absolutely. Getting word from our team that's working on this story. Where would we like to go next? Okay, so there are multiple charges that are involved here. We put together that graphic for you because there are 8 counts of leaving the scene of an accident, a boating accident that involves death or serious bodily injury. Now, we told you roughly 44 people on board that were injured, and then there was the fatality that took place. Now, this is a third-degree felony, leaving the scene where those injuries took place. He's also expected to be charged with 2 misdemeanors, he being Mr. Jeff Knight. Failure to maintain a safe speed and failure to maintain a proper lockout. Both of those are enhanced charges because they resulted in a deadly boating accident. Knight is also facing multiple lawsuits from passengers on the ferry that night who say he was careless and negligent while operating his boat.
Let's bring in 10 Tampa Bay News reporter Angelicia Bruton, who is live at the Clearwater Police Department. Angelicia, you were there the night of the ferry accident, and you were just in the room for that update from FWC.
Yeah, FWC, along with the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office and the Clearwater Police Department, was in this press conference, and they say that they are charging Knight with 8 third-degree felony charges for his involvement in the Clearwater boat crash that resulted in 1 man being killed and several others being injured. And they said they were able to determine 8 based off of the number of people that were injured. It says that investigators were able to determine that Knight did stick around for a little bit, but through the 911 calls that they mentioned, they said that that was a big part of determining that Knight did flee the scene. And then the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office was able to track him down and then stop him in the water. They said that he will be facing charges for leaving the scene of a boating accident with a death and serious bodily injury. And again, 1 count for each person that was injured. And FWC says that this took a lot of work. They said that a lot of people were questioning how long the investigation was taking, like you guys mentioned, and they said that they had to look at a lot of things For example, surveillance video, physical evidence. We do know that Knight's boat was seized the night of the crash, and they also interviewed multiple people about this investigation and about what happened. They said they had about 48 interviews, and they also did a digital reconstruction to take a look at all of the damage that was sustained that night. And it did happen about 3 months ago. So I'm going to take you guys back to that night, back in late April when this happened. I did respond when that call came out saying that there was a ferry crash. The Clearwater Ferry was coming from the Sugar Sands Festival, and they had about 40 people on board that boat. Clearwater officials called it a mass casualty event that night just because of how many victims there were and just the demand of people needing help. The scene that night, it was extremely chaotic. I remember seeing multiple agencies from multiple different cities trying to get people out of the water as quickly as they can and get them to the hospital. Officials said that many people had broken bones and several were even sent to the hospital with trauma alerts. One family I spoke to, I remember seeing a pregnant woman, and she said as soon as Knight's boat hit the ferry, she remembers just being hit by just force coming from the back, and she said she was knocked down. And she is just one of 3 families that will be suing Knight, and family members will also be hoping that more charges will be coming. During the press conference today, FWC says that the state attorney's office will be charging Knight with misdemeanor charges for speeding. And we also learned that the Clearwater boat ferry captain will also be facing a charge for not having proper lighting, and that person will be facing a misdemeanor charge for that. And we also know that Knight is already bonded out of jail. His bond was $40,000, and that was $5,000 for each count.
Yeah, thank you, Angelicia. I talked to some of those victims that were on the ferry a few days later, and all they wanted was justice. They just didn't understand after what happened that night why there was no arrest, why nobody had been arrested yet. And we kept telling them that FWC that says these boating accident investigations are just different. It takes a while, and that's why we are seeing those charges now, because they were able to mount up that evidence. I think they called it an exhaustive efforts, mountain of evidence is what they called it, from all of the interviews that they did and all the 911 calls and everything that they collected, and that's why we saw those charges now. But a lot of those families, then it's been 3 months, they didn't understand why it was taking so long. They lived through what happened on that boat, lots of them with injuries and recovering from those injuries and not understanding why nobody had been arrested yet. And so I know today a lot of them are saying, okay, this is justice. Somebody is facing charges for what happened that night.
Officials deal with the facts. You often get an opportunity to record the facts and the emotions. So for them, what exactly is justice?
I think people just wanted to see somebody be held accountable. Mm-hmm. There was a death, there was these injuries, there was this video that we all saw that night of the crash, and a lot of them couldn't understand, what happened there, who was responsible, and why isn't somebody being held accountable. And that's why we didn't see the charges right away, because you have to do your investigation. You have to see what the evidence was and see if there is an accident or if there was enough to charge somebody with what happened that night. And that's what we saw. And they said, officials said that they took in not just the witness interviews, but they took in the 911 calls. And when I was looking at that search warrant, Frank, it said that witnesses told FWC officials that Knight was on the phone with his attorney during that accident. And
on the phone with his attorney
during that accident. And then they also said they took on the 911 calls, what they were hearing in the background.
My goodness. A lot of people don't always remember direct quotes, so they definitely pay attention to body language. One of the conversations that has come out of all this was the change in Mr. Knight's demeanor. Let's go ahead and listen in on this.
There was a period of time where his vessel and the crew stayed on scene. There were some 911 calls made, but then that 911 call, as it progresses, you can hear a voice that says, I don't want you to say anything. There's a lot of things that are being caught on that 911 call. So with that, we felt there was a significant change in an attempt to not stay. When you add that to what the Pinellas County State Sheriff's Office encountered, there was no attempt to actually complete the exchange of information, rendering all the aid that's possible, as well as if you're looking for the ability of emergency services, all of that would have been at the scene. There was no need to actually leave the scene itself.
And that is that surveillance video that we're talking about in the timeline as well. So this is what happened back in April. The ferry was headed back from the Sugar Sand Festival that was on Clearwater Beach, a big crowd out there. That surveillance video from Coachman Park shows Jeff Knight's boat crash into the ferry. That time, 8:40 or so in the evening. You can see he stayed on the scene there for about 10 minutes. That's what authorities told us as well. His attorney says he tried pulling the ferry closer to the shore to help. Then at 8:50, he leaves. Knight's attorney also says that's because his boat started taking on water. That is the conflicting part of the report as well. Mr. Knight says his boat took on water. According to the reports from investigators, that's not the case. FWC officials also just telling us that did not appear to be the case based on their evidence. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office stopped him, Mr. Knight, as FWC says he was returning home.
41-year-old Jose Castro died in the crash. He was a father of 2 girls, an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. His sister called him her best friend, and all of his friends and family have told us he was always smiling and could brighten up any room. We heard from his sister just hours ago ahead of the new details we learned today.
I know that my brother went to the festival, took the ferry to Clearwater Beach by himself. He wanna have fun, he wanna enjoy a little bit of the Spanish music because it was a Spanish festival, Latin festival. He sent a videos to his friend, couple friends, sent a video how fun was how he was enjoying the music. He came back by himself. He was texting a friend saying, I'm going back because I have to do grocery shopping for my girls tomorrow because I have to pick them up from school tomorrow and just enjoy with them, and I want to make sure, you know, they have everything for tomorrow. The next day was Monday, so for his week start with his girls.
That final conversation really highlighting the person he was and what and who he lived for. His daughters, his family. And for the family man, by all accounts, the person who could light up a room, and everybody enjoyed what he brought to the table, including all the music.
Yeah, father of an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, 2 daughters, and their mom talked about the impact that this has just had on him not being here.
Today is not only just about the charges or the accident, but to remember the kind of man, the kind of father that Jose Castro was. Everyone loved him. Anyone that knows him, has crossed paths with him, knows what full of life he was. He would take the shirt off his back to give it to you if you needed it. My daughters miss him every day. There's no explanation. There's no peace. There's no happiness that can fill the hole that he's left. The person that used to light up the room is now filled with silence. What can we do? What have they done? How do I explain to my girls, my daughters, she can read the news. She can see what's happening. She hears, she listens. And she wants to know, she wants answers. Answers that I cannot give her, that no one can give us. Pepe was a wonderful soul who didn't deserve to go like this young. My daughter's this young to be missing their father.
It's heartbreaking right there. That was the mom of Jose Castro's 2 young daughters, 8-year-old and 3 years old. They spoke just a few hours before the press conference with Florida Fish and Wildlife officials talking about the charges that Jeff Knight faces. Now, when we know that he was booked last night, Frank, and when you go to the Pinellas County Clerk of Court site, the affidavit is sealed right now. And so we don't know when that will be unsealed, if it will be unsealed. But we did get a lot of information from that search warrant that they did back in June that kind of reiterated what we heard today from FWC officials, from what witnesses on Knight's boat said about he really wasn't going to really render aid until everybody on the boat, on his boat, told him to do so. We heard him, he was quoted saying, "My life is over" after the accident. That's what witnesses on his boat were saying. And so we also saw in that search warrant.
Called his attorney.
Yeah, he called his attorney. When the crash happened, we know he was on and off the phone with his attorney. And then we also know at the very bottom of that search warrant, it was noted that there was no evidence that his boat was actually taking on water. And that was the big reason they were saying that he left the scene, because his boat was taking on that water.
All right, fantastic reporting there, Jen. And also, 10 Tampa Bay News reporter Asha Patel has been on this story since it started, and for a better part of the day as well. Asha, you sat in on that first news conference that took place with Jose Castro's family as you heard some of that harrowing sound as they recounted the moment they found out what happened. What else was said to you after that all wrapped up?
Yeah, you know, they said that this is a positive step, but this is still very difficult for them because they don't want Jose Castro's memory to be forgotten. Now, Jose Castro's sister Sandy Todd said that Sunday of the crash, Jose was on the ferry leaving a music festival, trying to get home to go grocery shopping for his daughters. Unfortunately, he never made it home, being the only one to pass away in this tragedy. The mother of his two girls, Jenny, also spoke. She said while the charges are a step forward, her daughters still have to live every single day without their father. I spoke to Jose Castro's cousin before that news conference, and her name is Maria, and she said to me how she has seen smiles fade throughout her family after Jose Castro passed away.
I saw my cousin and my aunt. I mean, I don't see the light, the happy light of my aunt used to have, of course. Everybody's still, you know, a little sad, but just living their lives and waiting for justice.
Now, Jose Castro's family did put a cross here by the Clearwater Harbor, and every day they come here to give flowers and to remember Jose Castro.
Wow. Yeah, I know, Asha, you've been on this story. You've talked to his family, I think, day one after we heard the news of his passing. And I just can't even imagine it, the grieving still taking place. We saw that there in that press conference today.
You know, that's right. A few days after this crash happened, I got to speak to Jose Castro's sister, and then a few days after that, I spoke to the cousin, and they said while this is very difficult for them, it's also difficult for the family that Castro has in Peru. His mother is there every day crying and grieving. I'm reporting live in Clearwater. Asha Patel, 10 Tampa Bay.
All right, Asha, thank you. And you just said moments ago, people want justice. Ultimately, they want Mr. Castro back. The justice does not supersede wanting him back. His young girls having to try and make sense of that, and everybody else involved in that collision, the injuries they sustained, and the horror that stays with them.
Yeah, I think that's why we have seen lawsuits being filed as well, because as they waited to see whether or not anybody would be charged in this, a lot of them took and filed lawsuits from what happened that night.
Yeah, and I always try to steer away from the word closure because, again, you can never come full circle on those moments, but authorities saying this is the first step toward closure. Multiple agencies involved in this, among them U.S. Coast Guard, Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Clearwater Police, and many more as this investigation continues.
And Florida Fish and Wildlife, and that's what they said, that we saw it take 3 months because you had all of these agencies working together and making sure that they had everything that they needed. They had that mountain of evidence to see whether or not they had enough to bring charges forward.
And even though it's been 3 months, Jen, they said this is an expeditious investigation that has taken place based on the chronology of events. Now, Knight is facing 8 counts of leaving the scene of a boating accident involving death or serious bodily injury. That is a third-degree felony. He's also expected to be charged with 2 misdemeanors. That includes failure to maintain a safe speed and failure to maintain a proper lockout. Both of those are enhanced charges because they resulted in a deadly boating accident. Knight is also facing multiple lawsuits from passengers, as you just mentioned, Jen, on the ferry that night, who say he was careless, even negligent, while operating that boat.
Yeah, in 2019, court records show Knight was involved in a boating accident and faced charges including careless operation of a vessel and violation of navigation that caused an accident. Those charges were dismissed. He was cited for careless operation of a vessel in 2017. Also in 2012, Knight was sued by the family of a man who died after falling into the water while getting off a boat they said belonged to Knight. The family says it did not have proper safety railing along the gangway. The case was dismissed.
Now, also, we just heard from a representative from the state attorney's office on how they reached these charges, which, by the way, includes one against the ferry boat captain. Let's go ahead and listen in.
So we're confident in the charges that we've brought forward. We have a very good working relationship with Florida Fish and Wildlife, and that plays into the time that we've spent over the past 3 months looking into everything. We take time to compare facts and put them towards the law. We don't make emotional decisions at the office. So that's why we have the charges that we have here. Well, obviously this was a very tragic case that occurred, and we've taken the time over the past 3 months to look at everything, not make any emotional choices or reactions, look at the evidence, look at the facts, compare everything to the laws that we have, and that's how we've gotten to where we are today. Obviously, we are happy with the position that we're in, and we're confident with the charges that we're bringing forward. Mr. Knight was ultimately cooperative and did come back from the Bahamas, and so now we're starting the next leg of the case.
Factually speaking, Mr. Kimmerer was charged as the captain of that vessel for not having that light present at the time of the event. That fact has been documented, and that's what those charges were for.
Yeah, and the state attorney, they're very confident in the charges that they have brought forward because of the evidence that they have with this case.
Want to be extra sure that it's stuck.
Yeah. Well, 10 Tampa Bay News reporter Chris Hurst spoke with the first responders who rushed to the scene that night and got a look into what they faced to save lives.
Sunday night, we were actually just at the table watching some baseball when the call initially came out.
Nate Vasquez and his shift partner, Rob Ramos, arrived within minutes of the call and knew there were multiple injuries from two boats colliding.
I will say I never thought of a boat wreck with 45 or 50 patients.
When we were going in to the incident is when it, was my first time thinking about something like that.
Their rescue lieutenant, Robbie Weiner, was in charge of the triage. He was the first from the station to arrive and could hear screaming from the shoreline.
I could hear the concern that people were having. I could see people visibly upset. I could see people injured, and I could see that they needed help.
We had to carry all of our bags through a large marsh area, kind of like wet sand, into some waist-deep water to actually get to the boat.
These two. This one first.
They all used one word to describe the scene: chaos.
You can't mimic the level of chaos of showing up to 45 injured people that you would think in a classroom or with actors or anything, being waist deep in water with a boat that's moving, with lights, sirens, helicopters flying over, a pirate ship nearby. It was very intense, and you can't prepare for that.
But they fell back on their training for a mass casualty incident.
Just the passion for helping people.
Finding those with the worst injuries and doing their job.
My goal in my life is to make a difference in somebody's life, and this job affords me that opportunity every single day.
It really is the muscle memory from those worst case scenarios right there. Chris Hurst reporting. By the way, there's another mass casualty training happening tomorrow. That's at Clearwater High School. Don't want you to be alarmed. This helps first responders, as you just saw, know what to do in situations like what we're reporting on right now. So if you see a lot of emergency personnel out there tomorrow morning, it's just a training drill. And as we've continued this conversation about this ongoing investigation, 3 months worth, even though they say it's an expeditious form of investigation material that has come forward, we think it's taken a long time. They say not so much. They've had a lot to go through.
Because it's a boat accident investigation.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine they're not dealing with a car accident where you see the accident right there on scene. You can reconstruct, you have the road, you're dealing with a body of water, and this is why it just takes longer. The amount of agencies that had to collaborate together during this investigation, from Coast Guard to FWC. And I think even after this accident happened, really quick, once they said who Jeffrey Knight was, he's a prominent business owner, and we saw days after the crash, he stepped down from his position at Janice Live. I've been texting with his team. We were hoping to get a statement from his team on all of this.
No, you're expecting that, yeah.
Yeah, before we get off of air here. So if we don't get that, we will get that online for you guys to see what his team has to say. They have been responsive to us over the past couple of months, shared letters with us that they sent to FWC about just things they want to make sure that the investigation did not overlook, that they made sure that they got inspection records from the ferry. That night, we saw from the search warrant, Knight had mentioned, where were the lights? Where were the lights? What happened to the lights on that ferry? So again, the affidavit for this case is sealed. We don't know if that will be unsealed, but we did see a lot of the investigative part, those interviews, they were in that search warrant that we have been reporting on.
So over the course of 3 months or so, you've had a lot of conversations with people off air, some of which, you're still trying to piece together, but some of those questions have helped you know what to ask family members and what family members can, you kind of a conduit here for people.
Yeah, we spoke to many of the victims who were on the ferry that night, and that was the big thing. They just wanted to see some sort of justice, and they were calling justice being somebody face some sort of accountability for what happened. They were on this ferry back from the beach heading back over to Clearwater, and then they ended up just in this crash, some of them facing, you know, some pretty bad injuries. And then of course we had the death. And so that's what they wanted to see, was some sort of accountability. And we saw that in the news conference today, is why we saw these charges being brought forward, because they believe they had enough evidence.
An arrest was made.
An arrest was made. And then hopefully we will see that affidavit. Just right now it is sealed. I'm told that a judge has to unseal it, so we just have to see if and when that will happen.
And Mr. Knight returning from the Bahamas, authorities saying he has been cooperative. And I want to give you a quick recap here. The deadly crash happened almost exactly 3 months ago, April 27th, a little bit